Welcome to this evening's meeting of the Westerville City Schools Board of Education. We're delighted to have all of you. This evening's agenda will be displayed on the screens in the front of the room. There will be one opportunity tonight to address the board, and it's agenda item 3.1. There's a sign-up sheet located on the back table of the room. Each speaker will have 5 minutes to address the board, and there will be a timer shown on the screen. And with that, Ms. Marshall, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Bell?
Here.
Mrs. Meyer?
Here.
Dr. Westerville?
Here.
Mrs. Altman?
Here.
Mrs. Davidson?
Here. Will you please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And we do not have any public comments this evening. So 4.1, a resolution to suspend Robert's Rules of Order. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes.
Dr. Westerville?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes. Up next, 5.1, Board Member Professional Development. And I am going to ask Vaughn to introduce our guest tonight. He was gracious enough as past board president to set up this training, and it got a little delayed, so here we are tonight.
Thank you, President Davidson, members of the board, Dr. Kellogg, Ms. Marshall. I am very pleased. We are pleased to have with us this evening, again, Mr. Steve Francis. Mr. Francis has 35 years of experience as public and private sector lawyer and diversity professional. He has worked with entities like the Ohio Department of Development, the Ohio Attorney General's Office, the PUCO, Bank One, or now Chase, and Honda of America. He has served as the Chief Diversity Officer for the City of Columbus, and he is now the President and Lead Strategist of Franchise D&I Solutions, LLC. Steve was with us last year for the inaugural board training for DEI training, and has graciously agreed to come back be with us as we continue this work. And so I turn it over to Mr. Steve Francis, who will be our facilitator for this evening. Welcome.
Thank you, Reverend Bell, and I'm pleased to be back, and I'm pleased to meet the newest board member, Christy. December, I understand, had to be postponed due to some serious things that some of the board members were dealing with, and I know, not to talk out of school, but there was a board member that had a family member that was really in some bad shape, and I hope that all has gone well with that situation. Either way, God's willing hand was in it, I know, and whatever happened was the best thing that could happen. We're going to talk about race and racism today, and we're going to talk about inclusive leadership. So the workshop is called Leading with Inclusion and Racial Awareness. We start with racial awareness because our firm believes that you can't even seriously consider dealing with issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion until you first walk through the narrow gate of race relations and racism that's plaguing our country. We can ignore it like an elephant in the room, or we can get comfortable with it, understand it, and do our best work in spite of it. Does that make sense? So first, I wanted to start by doing an icebreaker. Well, actually, I think we got rid of the icebreaker. We're going to go right into some key concepts. Our firm likes to believe that diversity is a fact. When we grapple with the fact that diversity is real and that no walls, laws, or executive orders will prevent the inevitability of the diversification of our society and our world, once we grapple with the first step of the 12-step program, then we can understand the differences better, understand that there's value in those differences, and capitalize off of them to be the best school district that we possibly can be. Because your school district is diverse, and we'll talk about that a little later. Inclusion is an act. You can't put a poster on the wall that says inclusion, wave a wand, snap your fingers, and poof. It's an inclusive environment. Inclusion takes 24/7, all day, every day, affirmative modeling by each and every one of you, starting with the board members. You model the behavior that you expect to exist within your school district. Certainly kids follow our example, right? And so when you take a day off from inclusion and practice exclusion, all the great inclusive work that you've done before that is forgotten, and the people will only remember that exclusive thing that you did or didn't do. So it's an act. It takes affirmative action to be inclusive. Equity must be exact. I can't go to Sam's Club and buy a bulk thing for each one of you and say, John, this is for you for the rest of your life. Good luck. Christy, I'm not giving you anything different than I gave John. I'm treating you all the same. But equity is not sameness. It's anything but sameness, because we're all unique, diverse individuals who have unique, diverse needs that aren't the same. So what sense does it make to give everybody the same thing if they're so different? It's counterintuitive. So we have to meet people where they are along the diversity spectrum of need, understand what that need is, and work our hardest to give them what they need to have the access to the opportunity that everybody else has. Equity, we know that nobody starts at the same place on the starting line, but we have a responsibility to make sure they can finish at the same place if they choose. They don't start the same, but we have to work hard to make sure they can finish the same. Race is a social construct. What do you mean, Steve? I mean, it's a humanly invented classification system invented by a man named Dr. Samuel Morton. He had flawed and biased findings that have been since used to justify hundreds of years of horrors like slavery and genocide. Raise your hand if you're familiar with the existence of slavery and genocide in our country and in our world. I had you raise your hand like you're in class. That's awesome.
And we responded.
Race is a humanly invented classification system invented as a way to define physical differences between people, but more often used as a tool for oppression and violence. Another trick question. How many of you know that we're dealing with oppression and violence based on this thing called race, which isn't real? We're killing each other. We're hating each other. We're discriminating each other. Oh, man. All on something that's not even real. This paradox, this strange thing where race is both not biologically real, yet incredibly and socially and politically real. In other words, there's no gene, chromosome, or DNA in our body called race. It doesn't exist. But the paradox is it's incredibly socially and politically real, a la the census. So they make us choose black, white, Asian, Hispanic, 2 or more. Raise your hand if you've met a person identified as 2 or more. Okay. What does that tell you about them? Absolutely nothing. So we want to lean away from race when we describe ourselves and more towards culture. Culture means I'm not Hispanic, but I'm from Cuban and Bolivia. Culture means I'm not white, but I'm Polish, Irish, American. Hispanic is a race or ethnicity, but the culture is, the Hispanic culture is so diverse. That diaspora is one of the most diverse in the world. I'm not black. I have parents that are of Jamaican American and Asian American immigrant descent. By the way, that describes Kamala Harris, the Vice President of the United States of America. Religious assumptions around race. You've heard these terms maybe. Some races are divine and pure. Others are unholy and soulless. Scientific theories around race. Natural order, the survival of the fittest. Some races are just superior than others. Being unfit or weak is the result of being inferior race versus being the result of genocide. Pseudoscientific views about race. Groups based on visual characteristics need to be civilized, like those Native Americans that were here before the colonizers. Eugenics and medical practices say reproducing good genes is good and restricting reproduction of bad genes is bad or good. Restrict those bad genes. You all know that there's been genetic engineering in this country for a really, really long time. So here we have those census boxes. Are you white or are you Irish, Polish, American? Are you black or are you the American-born daughter of Asian and Jamaican American immigrants? Are you Hispanic or are you of Bolivian and Cuban descent? The culture tells us so much more about us, and it engages us in the conversation. Tell me about your Bolivian culture. I want to learn about that. And I'll share what you may not know about my Jamaican American immigrant heritage. Raise your hand if you don't believe that race is a social construct. That's good. We're making progress. Here's something that I want you to read from you should have this in your handout. It's better legible. Jane Elliott, if you go on our firm website, you'll see a rotating picture with me with Jane Elliott in it. She was an elementary school teacher in Iowa who had an experiment with her second and third graders. After Martin Luther King was assassinated, she had to make these kids understand what actually happened. Because they were thinking, well, Miss, why did they kill a king? That's what they asked her. So she made them choose sides. Raise your hand if you have brown eyes. Raise your hand if you have blue eyes. So she pitted the blue-eyed and the brown-eyed against each other. You may have seen this video. The Eye of the Storm, brown-eyed, blue-eyed. The thing that is so compelling in the video, which we've used at Honda and at school boards, is she had flashcards. And the superior group for that day, the Blue Eyes, let's say, performed off the charts with the flashcards. The group that was deemed inferior by Jane Elliott, the Brown Eye group, they did worse on the flashcards than they had ever done that grade year. So you see how if somebody tells you you're less than or inferior based on some classification, in this case race, it affects your performance. You think lesser of yourself, so you perform lesser. And so that's how this thing called racial divide can permeate down through our school systems and impact people from being the very best that they can be. Oh, I do want to take you through this. And she did this when she came to Columbus. The mayor had her come and speak during Martin Luther King Day. She said, if you as a white person would be happy to receive the same treatment as our black citizens do in this society, please stand. Unsurprisingly, no one moves. She pauses. You didn't understand the directions? If you white folks want to be treated the way black folks are in this society, please stand. Still silence. Nobody's standing here. That says very plainly that you know what's happening to blacks. You know you don't want it for you. So I'm going to ask you a question. Why do you think nobody stood? Feel free to answer. Why do you think nobody stood when she asked that compelling question? If you could trade places with a white person, please stand. I'm sorry, with a black person, please stand.
Well, I think for a couple of reasons. One is the conclusion she wants you to draw, and that is that white people absolutely understand that there is a different standard of treatment for people of color versus what they themselves experience. So, of course, they would not stand. I think a second contributing factor to it has to be in those types of environments, people are less likely to respond to those kinds of commands. But the former is what she was after.
Thank you, Reverend Bell. Any other responses? Any other thoughts?
My mic's not. Oh, sorry. And just like in healthcare, there's differences in how people are treated based on color and all sorts of things. And so it's known, right? And that's why they didn't stand. But also, some people may be fearful, I think as Reverend Bell said too, in participating. And maybe some didn't know, maybe some did, and the fear of being called out too.
Yes.
I think in addition to the idea that white people know that society, right, treats black people differently, I think a lot of people in that room are probably realizing that they themselves, right, they themselves have engaged in racist behavior, thinking, and so on. So it's a reflection not just on what's out there, but it's a self-reflection too that keeps them in their seats.
And she uses the comparison of white-black. And again, race is not real, it's a social construct. But this could apply to folks who are LGBTQ. This could apply to the genocide that happened when the Germans, did that horrible thing to the Jewish people. This could apply to Rwanda, where a whole country was, just torn apart through genocide. Tribal wars, the Shiites and the Kurds, whatever. It's those differences that we choose to demarcate ourselves against each other and mistreat each other because of that difference that has this whole world upside down. Jane Elliott, pioneer of diversity, she's old enough to be able to say this stuff, but what she said here I thought was very, very insightful. This diagram is intended to let us think about how we become anti-racist. Now, I'll tell you that I'm not calling anybody in here racist. The other thing about this diagram is there is no mention of any race. You don't see the word white, black, Hispanic, Asian. And that's because there are LGBTQ races, there are female races, there are millennial races, there are Hispanic races, there are white races, there are black races. This applies to ideology that permeates across classifications. So if we go above the dark blue circle, in the fear zone, we deny racism as a problem. Put our head in the sand. We progress to the learning zone and we recognize racism is a present and current problem. And then we, explore the growth zone and we identify how we may even unknowingly benefit from racism. Called privilege. Down below the blue circle, in the fear zone, we only talk to others that think and look like we are. That sameness bubble. And because we're divided so much on racial lines here, this is more intense now than it ever was before. You're in the learning zone when you listen to others who think and look differently than you. You're at least willing to listen. That's the biggest step of understanding differences, listening. I surround myself. I dive into the deep end of the pool with others who think and look differently than me when I'm in the growth zone. One more example. Right above fear zone, I avoid hard questions. You're in the learning zone when you seek out questions that make you uncomfortable. Who wants to be uncomfortable? Nobody. But we have to, in the growth zone, sit with your discomfort until it becomes secondhand or second nature. And those people that used to scare you don't scare you anymore. Those people that you heard those things about on the news are debunked, and you see who they really are. So that's what we have to do across differences. We have to sit in them and understand that they're here to stay. Remember, no walls, laws, executive orders can prevent it. Diversity is here. It's going to happen. It's going to increase. I'm going to ask you a question. Is Westerville City Schools more in the fear zone of becoming anti-racist, the learning zone of becoming anti-racist, or the growth zone of becoming anti-racist? Feel free to answer.
I think the learning zone. I think that's what we're working towards.
Why would you say that?
Because we've made diversity and equity a priority and made it a set priority. We're investing in it. We're investing in people and resources, and I think we're all trying to learn and grow and on a journey as a district.
Thanks, Tracy. Any other thoughts? Where do you think the school district is? Nancy?
I have difficulty putting us in any of the spots because it seems that, it all depends on where you are and who you're talking to
And on what day,
which
right?
form of racism you're talking about. And it weaves back and forth. If I were going to average it all together, which is dangerous, as you know, but if I were going to average it all together, I would put us in the learning zone, but that would cause me great discomfort because we are all over the place, like most society.
It can vary from building to building, right?
It does.
Classroom to classroom.
Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts? Where do you think the district is? Learning? Fear?
You're looking right at me, aren't you? I would say, from a people perspective, I agree with the variance in individual people and variance between classrooms, et cetera. I think from a leadership perspective, what I appreciate about the board is that they've stated we're moving. And so they've placed us as a goal within that learning zone, trying to move towards the growth zone as an obvious, clear expectation. And I think that's a big driver. And then even within the organization, we have some folks that are very much in the growth zone, some individuals who are very much in the growth zone, and increasingly helping us pull us along. So a lot of work to do, a lot of different individuals, but in terms of setting a standard for what we want to be, I think that's pretty clear.
Jennifer?
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with anything that's been said, and maybe this goes back to what Nancy said. So Dr. Kellogg just pointed out we have, some people are in the growth zone and pushing us in that direction. I think just to put words to it, we also have people who are in the fear zone, and we have people who are in, like we said, different zones at different moments or with different types of racism, right? So we're all over the place. And I think that's where, like, the building level work. So, like, we can sit here and, East Wind Drive and do this, but it's like the building level work and then how that drills down into individual classrooms and to individual staff members and students. Like, that's the really hard work of figuring out how to change this complex system and all the people, who are part of it. And you're not going to get everybody in the growth zone. I'm just going to, right? And very few people are going to be in that zone all the time. But yeah, it's complicated.
It was a trick question, because the right answer is Westerville City Schools is, I see a little bit of all three of those zones in Westerville City, and some of you said that. It's so fluid. It varies from classroom to classroom, from building to building. Your job, your challenge is to weave some type of thread of consistency through buildings, classes, the whole district. I wanted to point this one out. I don't let mistakes deter me from being better. At Honda, we used to say innovation doesn't occur until the first mistake is made. No mistakes, the assembly line is going along smoothly, we don't have to think, we're mindlessly putting parts on cars, but then the line shuts down and boom! Everybody goes into zero-based problem-solving mode. The sparks of innovation fly, new things and theories fly out, and they get that line started back up, and all of a sudden, we're better. Because we found a way to keep that same thing from happening again. So we can't be afraid to make mistakes, and we can't penalize people for making mistakes as leaders. We have to give them room as a supportive leader to make mistakes and be there to catch them when they fall. But obviously, don't make the same mistake twice. Because there's growth, learning, and innovation through those mistakes. People are afraid to say the wrong thing about race and racism, so they say nothing. And they don't learn, and nobody improves. So, and we'll talk about psychological safety at the end. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, because that's where the magic happens. You as leaders have to be supportive enough so that people feel comfortable not being perfect, feel comfortable saying something that may not be right, but then asking that person, I want to learn. How can I get better? How can I avoid saying that thing again? What did what I said mean? Right? We're going to go to some videotape. And this video I call Flags. And it's a 1988 episode from The Golden Girls.
Everybody was courteous and mannerly, and gentlemen would ask ladies for the favor of a dance. And Cousin Rex would be home on vacation from Colonel Bob's school for bad boys.
Now I get it. This is just good old-fashioned fun.
Yeah.
Okay, well, say, how about on Tuesday nights we hang the Nazi flag, hire an oompa band, and dress you up like Eva Braun?
This is not the same as the Nazi flag.
Yeah, well, it is to me, Blanche. But when you look at this flag, you see some southern fairy tale with a guy who looks like Burl Ives dressed in a white suit, tipping his hat to you, saying, "Evening, Miss Blanche."
Evening. Oh, I'm sorry, brother. You were making a point.
That's not funny, Blanche.
Well, that's ancient history, and you know it. Things aren't like that anymore.
You did the right thing, Rose.
I did? I did the right thing. I did?
Yeah. Sometimes what you believe is more important than business. Although what some people believe is unbelievable. happiest man they ever wrote. Although ain't no one in college, you no trouble, Tom.
You hold on to that one. He's a good one. What did you say?
He's a good one.
Roland. Wait. Hey, Roland. I don't feel like that woman in there. I don't feel that way at all.
But can't you see, Blanche, that flag ties what you believe and what she believes together. Look, I'm telling you, the legacy of that flag is alive every time I walk down the street with a group of my friends and I see a white person cross over to the other side because they're afraid. Or look, when I'm in the elevator with somebody like you and you're all huddled over in the corner wondering what I'm going to do, sometimes I just want to go, back there, huh? Just to break the tension. So please don't tell me about that flag. I've battled that flag all my life.
Look, Roland, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything you've been through. But what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to think about all my family, all my friends? All right. When I was in school, maybe I was a little less sensitive than I could have been. Yeah, but I was just doing what all my friends were doing. They were my friends. And we were just acting like everybody we knew acted. And when I had my first baby, well, the hospital was packed, and I had to share a room with a young black woman. George made a big stink about the accommodation she had to her. I know her baby was at this kid's mine. Cute, in fact. Rebecca was an ugly baby. Turned out fine. Ugly baby. You get an idea of how she looked if you catch Sophia some morning with her tea towel. The point is, what am I supposed to do and think about my family now? What am I supposed to think about all those people I love? What am I supposed to think about me? Everything I grew up believing in, all of my wonderful memories, they're all tarnished now by the truth. I owe you an apology. Will you stay?
Blanche, you really have to start listening to me when I tell you something is bothering me. And I'll try to understand why some of these things mean so much to me. Look, the whole world is messed up right now, and I would like to see that get better, but in order for that to happen, white people are going to have to start making positive assumptions when they see people of color. And people of color could make positive assumptions when they see white people.
The title of that video above it said, "This is not a new conversation." That was 1988. May as well have been released this morning. Blanche said, that's ancient history. But we know that we saw that flag prominently carried in the United States Capitol on January 6th. Don Cheadle, one of my favorite actors, said, "Can't you see, Blanche," when the lady said, "You keep him, he's a good N-word," basically. He said, "Blanche, can't you see?" She said, "I don't think that way. I don't think that way at all. Can't you see that that flag ties what you believe and she believes together?" Just like a lot of flags flown on January 6th tied what those people carrying the flag believe and what those thousands of other people that weren't carrying the flag believe together. I had the horror as a little child traveling back from Cincinnati of seeing a big cross burning beside a barn that had the Confederate flag painted on top of the whole roof. It was the hugest symbol of the Confederate flag I've ever seen in my life. And there were people in white hoods circled around the burning cross. So I was 9, maybe 10. My twin sister and I asked my mom, "What's that? What are they doing?" She didn't say a word, and she sped up. And she didn't say a word for the next 30 minutes, probably figuring out what to say or not to say to us. But I will never forget that moment. Sorry for not holding the mic. because that's my reality of the Confederate flag. Those Ku Klux Klan people circled around a burning cross with the Confederate flag painted on their barn. Not history or heritage or tradition. The three magic words of diversity are help me understand. You heard Don Cheadle said, I have to understand why that flag means so much to you, Blanche. And he also said the other magic word, listen. You have to listen to me, Blanche, when I tell you something's bothering me. He was an employee in her restaurant. In the grand opening, she wanted to display this flag that she was so proud of. And that was a symbol of terrorism to Don Cheadle. That's an example of how two people can look at the same thing and have totally different opinions about it. Just like they can look at one textbook in your schools and have totally different views about it. Our job is to help them understand that there are different views about the same thing. And that's okay. Our job is to bridge the gap between those differences so that there is increased understanding about why they could or should feel that way. We can stick to our own beliefs, but we have to make sure that that bridge is built. Martin Luther King, on the night before he was assassinated, at his famous mountaintop speech. This is part of the speech that you don't hear publicly that much. But he said that night before he was assassinated, it's no longer a choice between violence and nonviolence in this world. It's nonviolence or non-existence. That is where we are today. That was April 3rd, 1968. He may as well have said it on Good Morning America this morning. So why hasn't anything changed? Anybody want to answer that question or take a stab at it? Why hasn't anything changed?
There are a lot of reasons. There are lots, and we could probably each come up with 50. And those would they'd all have a different flavor. One of the more cynical, perhaps, reasons that I say things haven't changed is power differentials and follow the money. And I see that with whatever kind of racism we want to talk about.
The Bible says money is the root of all evil.
Love of money is the root of all evil.
Thank you, biblical scholar Nancy. Black Lives Matter has been a phrase that's been thrown around with varying views. So I thought that this way of looking at it by Doug Williford could help some people look at it slightly differently. If my wife comes to me in obvious pain and asks, "Do you love me, dear?" An answer of, "I love everyone, sweetheart," would be truthful, but she might not like that. She wants a "Yes, I love you, dear" answer. If a coworker at Westerville City Schools comes up to me upset and says, "My father just died," a response of, "Come on, get over it. Everybody's parents die," would be true because we all have our date and time. But that would be very hurtful and cruel to that coworker in the moment. So when a friend speaks out in a time of obvious pain and frustration and hurt, says, "Black lives matter," a response of "all lives matter," or for that matter, "blue lives matter," is truthful. But it is also hurtful and cruel in the moment. Does that help anybody look at this a little bit differently? We often hear a knee-jerk reaction, "all lives matter." it says Black Lives Matter, not Black Lives are better than, superior to, more. It doesn't say that, but people read that in it. What you don't also want to do is steal somebody's truth. If somebody, based on how they see things happening in the world, feels like Black lives don't matter as much as they should, and a lot of people have said they should have added one word to this phrase, Black Lives Matter too, T-O-O. Then I would have made it all right, I guess. But we're not choosing sides here. We're just saying that person's truth means that Black lives don't seem to matter. So what could happen here is a all lives and Black lives person could get together and they could say those three magic words. Help me understand what you mean by Black Lives Matter. Not a knee-jerk reaction, all lives matter. And then that Black Lives Matter person can say, help me understand what you mean by all lives matter. And then that bridge gets built. They may not agree, but they can understand why each other feels the way that they do about that. And they're better for it. They're not entrenched. They understand why they're saying Black Lives Matter. And he understands why they're saying Blue Lives Matter. Any questions, comments?
So I have just a reflection. I think a lot of this takes vulnerability and holding space for vulnerability and curiosity. And there's a lot of fear, and just my experience, right, is there's a lot of fear of not getting it right or saying something wrong, and so the vulnerability and the curiosity doesn't come into play.
Fear. Fear, what kind of fear? Fear of what?
I mean, fear of maybe saying something that hurts somebody's feelings, or not you say something and then you don't really realize the impact. Maybe certain words are said and don't know the full history of those words. So there's a lot of fear wrapped up, I think, and it's just been in my experience, like being on some of, the diversity committees and things, that sometimes there's just fear of not just about Black Lives Matter or, just all sorts of fear around diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, it's true. Political correctness, all those kinds of things have prevented us from learning about differences and being curious.
I think there are lots of different kinds of fear involved there, but I think one of them is fear of being changed. I think people are afraid to say, to see it from somebody else's point of view and to be open to that. I think it's very scary for lots of people.
And that's rooted in bias, right? You believe what you believe, and that's it. This won't get solved overnight, for sure. Not only do Black lives matter, but Asian lives matter. And we've seen the rise in hate crimes. 2021 study reported that hate crimes against Asians in America increased 164% since March of 2020. Can anybody guess what happened around March of 2020?
COVID-19.
They called it the Wuhan flu, the Hong Kong virus, or whatever. In Upper Arlington schools, they had little elementary schools playing COVID tag. And so they would go around and tease the Asian kids. Tag, you're it. You've got the COVID. That was kind of bad. But that's what this results in. 75% of anti-Asian hate crimes in 2021 report, the assailants were white men. Now, I'm not calling white men anything. I'm just reciting facts from a study from the Center for Study of Hate and Extremism. This isn't Franchise D&I Solutions talking. Ethnicity of hate crimes, Chinese lead the way. I wonder why. Koreans, Vietnamese, and Filipinos. Like I said, this thing that's not real has us hating, killing, hurting each other. I wanted to define some words and then we'll go to break. Our firm has one-word themes to try to define these terms. We say diversity means value. It's an and proposition, not an either or zero-sum proposition, where somebody wins with diversity and then as a result somebody loses. It adds to whatever is lacking in your organization. Doesn't take anything away, it adds. Different backgrounds, experiences, thoughts, races, genders, etc. That's the Webster Dictionary definition of diversity. But then we get to the proposed definition based on diversity best practices. Unique differences, which is different from differences. I can say, you know, Tracy, she's different. And that's not very positive, is it? But if I said, Tracy, she's unique, you immediately think she's special. She's got redeeming qualities to her. What's so unique? I want to find out what's unique about Tracy. Thoughts, beliefs, values, and life experiences. Trick question. Can you see any of those things with the naked eye? Thoughts, beliefs, values, life experiences? We get caught up on what we see and make that diversity. But unfortunately, it's true that we make 90% of our judgments about people based on only the 10% that we can see with the naked eye. Does that sound fair to you? If you look at the typical diversity iceberg, and many of you have seen some probably, the most important part of a person is underneath the waterline. Those thoughts, beliefs, values, life experiences. That's what makes us unique. Not the color of our skin or the gender. Oh, other human and cultural characteristics. That culture is important. Based on who we are, that's the DNA, and where we come from, what our life cocoon has shaped us to be, our environment, where we grew up, single parent home, raised by grandmother, raised by two gay men. That's the cocoon that defines where we come, what side of the railroad tracks we lived on, or what side of the river. I may have said this before. Somehow rivers divide school districts all around the state. And those people on the other side of the river, you don't want to be dealing with them because they're those people. Equity, exact. As I said before, engaging people and circumstances with fairness, justice, impartiality, and all those great things. In equity, you want to ensure that people and circumstances, so circumstances require equity, systems require equity, discipline requires equity, academic outcomes require equity, curriculum requires equity. So not only people, but circumstances need to be provided with exactly what they need to gain access to opportunity, be successful, live a full life, understand that fair is not equal. That's that Sam's Club example. And equity is not the same as equality. Equality is we're all wearing the same uniforms. Equity is we understand what the person in the uniform really needs. You may have seen this visual about equity. Kids on the crates. This liberation is not seen in a lot of them. It's also called justice in some images. But imagine with me, if you will, that you did an audit of your guidelines and policies and procedures, and you found, you asked the question, why do we have the fence? Well, we've always had the fence. That's never the right answer. It's always been that way, or we've always had it. That's never the right answer. So once you question and challenge your status quo, you find that maybe, just maybe, you don't even need the fence. So you save fence production costs, and you save costs of purchasing crates. And everybody enjoys the game. Inclusion means success. At Honda, we used to say, diversity is a reality, and inclusion is a choice. In other words, you can choose to be successful by including the rich, unique diversity in your problem-solving, decision-making, product development, outcomes, or not, because your competitors, when they include diversity, they will be more successful than you. I guarantee it. And success is the goal, right? Good. Engaging, valuing, involving, recognizing, utilizing, appreciating, connecting, all those great things, that's what inclusion is. The last part of this proposed definition is to help deliver the most creative, innovative, and impactful outcomes for all stakeholders. That's the business case of diversity. The business case comes from inclusion. It doesn't come by representation of diverse characteristics. It comes from including those diverse characteristics in your most important things that you do. Let's take a break. Now, we're going to talk census. We're going to talk demographics for a little while. And I want you to pull out that individual sheet that lays out the demographics of Westerville City Schools. It should have a front and back, does it? Okay. No, there's a, oh boy. Mine has a front and back. Because I'm going to focus on 2020. Oh. Yeah, 2020, 19, 20, and 21 are on the back. Yeah, it is on the slide. I mean, maybe you can read it. I thought it'd be more legible on the handout. But let me take you through the trends. And this is from the Brookings Institute. This isn't Steve Francis. This isn't Franchise D&I Solutions. This is a world-renowned think tank that says by 2060, we will be what they call a majority-minority society. That's where the gray bar representing the white population represents I'm sorry. Yes, I want to focus on the age under 18. I'm sorry. The phenomenon is that diverse people are having a lot of babies. So you see this middle bar, age under 18, by 2060, white population will be only 36.4% of the total population. And so if they continue to have children at that rate, we're going to be minority-majority. What's hidden in here is 2 or more. And there was a huge jump on 2 or more in the 2020 census, and I'll talk about that a little later. Here, you have a higher percentage of the population being over 65 years old, baby boomers like myself. So those folks are going to be near the end, whereas these folks are going to be, hanging around in bigger numbers. The population growth trends, those lines are all sloping downward. But I want you to look at the gray line, or the white population growth. It's sub-zero. Sub-zero growth in population of white folks through 2060. And here's the gap. The bright blue line and the gray line is the precipitative gap of white population versus minority population growth. The 2020 census data makes it a little clearer. You see the change from 2000, 69.1% was white, to 2020, 58.8%. That's more than a 10% drop in 20 years. So imagine if the white population decreases by 20% next 10 years, next 20 years. So in 2040, that number could well be 48.8%. So you can see how it will be a majority-minority even quicker than the experts estimate. You throw in 2 or more, that was the highest population growth in the census. And I had to write this down. In 2010, there were 9 million people who identified as 2 or more races on the census. In 2020, there were 33.8 million, basically 10% of the U.S. population of 334 million. That's a 276% increase. So I asked you, do you know anybody who identifies as 2 or more? That makes those numbers even more impactful. Now, I want you to note the red font asterisk. The 2020 data is likely underreported due to proposed census questions related to citizenship. You remember that, right? It scared some people away because they thought they'd be deported. And that was purposeful. To underreport those diverse people, mostly immigrants, so that they would not get the proportionate resources that they need, the proportionate congressional representation that they need. So imagine these numbers being even lower in some cases and higher in some cases. Now pull out the Westerville City Schools graph and just focus on 2020, on the last 3 bars there. White population in 2020, according to the census, is 58.8. Westerville City Schools population in 2020 is 53.49. Pretty close, but lower than the nation. Hispanic population, 18.7%. Westerville City Schools, 7.37%. So you've got a much higher Hispanic population nationally. Blacks, 12.1% nationally. Westerville City Schools is 25.27. Asian, 5.9% in the U.S. Census in 2020, 4.57% here in Westerville City Schools. And I think your 2 or more is 9.13%. So you're right about the same pace at 2 or more as is the country. So let's talk about these numbers just a little while. What do they say to you as board members for Westerville City Schools?
Before we jump to that question, so are these numbers, is this student population?
That's my understanding. And John provided this information to me.
Our numbers for our student population.
Correct,
Okay,
this is
got
the
it.
school district
Okay.
student population.
Okay.
But I would assume that that should be reflective of the community to an extent. You know, a lot of people don't have children. A lot of people send their children to private schools.
Our student population in the Westerville City School District is a lot more diverse than the general population of our district.
Very interesting. So what does that tell you, Reverend Bell?
Well, it tells us a number of things. It tells us that it tells us a number of things. It tells us that it follows the trend in the national data in terms of who's having kids, which populations are growing faster than others. We're seeing it reflected in the numbers of our student population.
That lines up with that 18 and under,
Yes.
right, which was far more diverse than the 65 plus. what does it tell anybody else? Any aha takeaway from this data, demographics?
The speed of the change in our demographics is phenomenal. You go back to 2027, our white population was at 70.63%, and in 2020, it's dropped to 53.39%. The shift has been dramatic and fast, and so responding to that as an organization is part of the challenge, right?
And I believe we spent some time on this last time. Trick question, rhetorical question, you can answer if you want. Is Westerville City Schools prepared to adequately support, educate, and graduate this level of diversity?
Ask the question again.
Is Westerville City Schools prepared to support, educate, and graduate the high percentage of diversity in its school district that outpaces, to your point, Reverend Bell, the community that surrounds it? Are teachers prepared? Are principals prepared? Is the board prepared?
Again, it's yes and no. I'm truly not trying to be wishy-washy with you. It's just when I look at the organization and its complexity, there are things we do well. There are areas where we're not prepared. We have, in some ways, culture clash as we look at changing demographics due to age and socioeconomics. We see culture clashes based on ethnicities as we look at what 15, 20 years ago we would have thought a traditional suburban population, which doesn't exist here anymore. So there are a number of clashes that are inherent to the changes we've seen. And with those clashes comes a continual need to adjust and readjust. And so what is prepared yesterday may not be the same level of preparation today. And schools in general, not Westerville City Schools alone, schools in general tend to focus a lot on the middle of the bell curve, whatever the bell curve is curving about. So a lot of attention, resources, practice focuses on that because of large numbers of people. So what we continually have to wrestle with in education is all of the diversity within the bell, and even more so the diversity that falls outside of that predominant area. And that's where the struggle always is for educators, I think, in meshing all of those components together within the time and resources that are available.
Well said. Those 20 and 20 extremes of the bell curve, they catch hell or catch heck.
I was just going to add that I think that there is movement towards that, right? Like the school district is working to move towards to be prepared for that. There are some teachers that are more prepared than some of the parents, and some parents that are more prepared than potentially some of the teachers. And so that brings in some of the internal and implicit bias maybe too. And so the district is working, at the building levels and throughout to try to work through all of that.
The goal of diversity, equity, inclusion, proficiency is to get better, not to get perfect. It's such an evolving, evolutionary thing that all you can do is try to improve the best you can to keep up with the shifting that's going on. Maya Angelou said, it's bad not to know. but it's worse not to want to know. And so we have to have the courage to want to know how to keep up with this thing, that's how to herd the cats, right? You were going to say something.
Well, I suppose it's similar to what you just said, but the word I was stuck on was prepared, because that implies like a static, status, right? Oh yeah, we're prepared. We got there. We're prepared. And I think the answer to your trick question is always no. Like, no, we're never prepared for this. We're constantly preparing. It's a practice. And so I think the illusion that will I get to the place where we're prepared, well, I think it's an illusion.
Yeah, it's the same illusion that diversity, equity, inclusion is transactional. You complete it, and it's checked off. No, it's a journey, and it's an ongoing operational imperative that you embed into your strategic planning every year. Any other thoughts?
I would just agree with that, because as I was sitting here reflecting, in order to even engage the question to provide an answer, I need to know, okay, so how are we defining prepared? What does that mean? Because I might think we're prepared, but you don't. And we're using two different metrics for determining what is prepared versus what is not prepared. And it's a moving, I think it is a shifting, it's a moving target. What we, I think most might consider prepared pre-COVID looks a whole lot different today. And so I think it's an evolving process.
That's a great point, Reverend Bell. What does prepared mean? And that takes, just like you're prepared for the next fiscal year with your business planning, that means you have to include DEI in your annual business planning process so that as best you can, you will be prepared for what's lying ahead based on what you know. And it's not checking the box. It's not flavor of the day. It's not issuing a statement. And I'm not claiming that you've done anything wrong or if you did or did any of that. It's having it as an embedded, integrated operational imperative that ultimately will make everything that you do able to serve these diverse folks the very, very best you can. Does that make sense?
And even things like the categories on these pages, right? Like the census categories. I'm a history dork, right? Like they change. And so when we project out here, we're projecting out categories that may not exist as such in 2060. So we also have to be prepared for that kind of change. I mean, to anticipate that we can't know what it will look like then.
Right. Remember, we talked about race being a humanly invented classification. It's a social construct, so they can change it again whenever they want, right?
I'm going to take
John?
a different shot at the prepared question and want to put a kid lens on it. So there's us looking at the system saying, is the system prepared? But the question is, do children under the system think we're prepared for the diversity that they bring to the table? And I'm going to broaden that and say kids don't live in a vacuum. So the way they see the world isn't just their school experience. They see the larger community around them. So the question of prepared is not just about schools. We own it. It's about the community and the society as a whole. So when students see their schools doing certain things, that may make them feel included, may make them feel there's equity. But they look at the broader society and say, but here's what I see in terms of CEOs, and here's what I see in terms of college admissions, and here's what I see in terms of healthcare outcomes, and here's what I see from politicians. So it has to be a broader context of, is our society prepared for the diversity that is here and growing and impacting us as a whole? And I think that becomes part of the pivot point of public schools in a public environment, is that that's where it all comes together. So the prepared piece is really a question to the students. How do they feel we're doing with that, and bringing that forward? And then how do they feel about the society and the communities they're going to walk into and live in and work in terms of that same preparedness? Are they ready for me? So there's an adult obligation there across the table.
I mean, that's excellent, John. You almost articulated a sort of a reverse 360 evaluation, to have that perspective of the young people. You know, you articulated, think global, act local, because they're in tune with the globe. Matter of fact, how many of you have one of these? This is the world. In some cases, the universe. They spend, what, 75% of their time on this thing? So we can't escape the global perspective, and they want to know how that makes sense for them here in Westerville, Ohio, in order to prepare them for that globe that they're going to go out into. Cubeville. I'll skip over this, but this is assuming positive intent. And what we want to do here is make sure that we, as a default, well, here's where confirmation bias comes in, this thing called confirmation bias. We make assumptions or biases, and we believe we are right. Then we defend our assumptions and try to make others wrong. Confirmation bias is when we search for information to support our biases and ignore facts and evidence to the contrary. We're going down that rabbit hole searching for the truth that we want to believe in and ignoring science, math, nature, all these things in the process that tell us something different. So assuming positive intent means consciously choosing to assume that our coworkers, friends, students, families are operating at their best ability and with their best and purest motives. Always starting from the idea that a person meant well or was doing their very best no matter what they say or do. Because guess what? People say and do the wrong things all the time. That gets into that idea of not being afraid to make a mistake or not shaming somebody when they might make a mistake. There are teaching moments here when people make mistakes. You build on mistakes. You don't tear people down for making them. Now, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. You give the default that they mean well, but if they cross you the second time, you don't have time for it. But you have to give them the room as leaders to assume that they're right, they have pure motives, that they don't have any hidden agendas. Leadership overview. Leaders who don't listen will eventually be surrounded by people who have nothing to say. What does that mean to you, Nicole?
People need to be heard.
Help me understand.
Help me understand the three magic words. My mother once told me, you never learn anything when you're talking. Think about it. Some people like to hear themselves talk. But if you don't listen, you'll have people that are shutting down, passive aggressive, not giving their best thoughts and ideas and perspectives about a problem. And then you will always do what you've always done and always be what you've always been.
If I could just tag 2 words on the end of that, I often think it should say nothing to say to them. Because people are still going to talk they're just not going to talk to you.
Yeah, that's good, Jen. I like that.
I like that, Jennifer. They'll leave that classroom or they'll leave that meeting and say, did you hear that idiot talk? He didn't listen to anything we were saying. The meeting after the meeting. Here's some benchmark leadership things from Fast Company magazine. Can somebody read that green part of the paragraph there?
Just the green part?
Yeah.
Most people view their own opinions as facts, but they are mostly expressions of their biased preferences, values, or beliefs.
You know, leadership has a lot to do with checking our biases. The whole idea behind biases is that you will never get rid of them. It's natural to have them. Everybody has biases. The key is to help give you tools to identify those biases when they pop up and manage them before they lead to bad judgment, bad decisions, bad outcomes. Sadly, people tend to select leadership and leaders without taking the time and effort to scrutinize a leader's track record. Do they really understand what they're doing? Somebody read the green part of that sentence, or paragraph.
People join companies but quit their bosses, and 35% of Americans would happily take a pay cut if they could get rid of their manager.
You haven't experienced anything like that in Westerville City Schools, right?
No,
Oh,
no,
absolutely
no.
not.
That's not a trick question, is it?
You know, people do leave people, they don't leave jobs. And so that's why it's important that teachers, principals, staff understand culture, competence, check their biases, lead with humility and understanding, be a supportive leader. We'll talk about the different inclusive leadership styles later.
So when was this data collected?
2021. Read that green one, John. What a segue. Here are 3 leadership traits that Fast Company in March of 21 recommends leaders to embrace. Humility. Compelling data that the most effective leaders, board members, are not just remarkably persistent, but also humble. Unfortunately, the recipe for leadership success today is more confident, hide your limitations, don't let them see you sweat. Don't worry about what people think because you're in charge, right? They'll have to get over it and get used to you. You're in charge. Your way, the highway. And lean in even when you lack the talent or experience to back it up. All bluff, no stuff. Curiosity. Here's that learning and asking questions. A strong desire to learn. A passion to ask questions rather than provide answers. How many of you feel more pressure to have all the answers all the time? It's okay to not have the answers. Telling John, and he was joking, he said, the place is going to fall apart when I'm not there. He was at the doctor. But in reality, he knew that everything was all right because he has highly capable people that he invests total confidence in. That's what this is all about. Knowing that you don't have all the answers, so you bring people around you that do. And the ability to listen. There's that listen again. Challenge one's preconceived notions and biases and to identify a gap between what you know and need to know. Have any of you met a know-it-all? Can't tell them anything. Good leaders understand that they don't know it all. And what can help leaders and their teams adapt to an increasingly diverse workforce or school population, student population, the things that we just talked about. So those three leadership traits, humility, curiosity, and then integrity. People, organizations, and societies are generally better off when their leaders are honest and ethical rather than immoral and corrupt. We turn on the news every day and we see that people are corrupt. People are immoral. And it's the new norm. Is that what our students should understand as the norm? How do we set an example of honesty and ethical behavior? If we are open the newspaper any given day, you'll see many examples of leaders who put their own interest ahead of those they lead. Any thoughts about these leadership traits? Another trick question, do they exist here in the Westerville City School District? I mean, you can lead from where you are. Teachers, staff, bus drivers, cooks, board members. Are they humble? Are they curious? Or do they have integrity? Maybe sometimes. Okay.
Most of the time.
Most of the time.
I truly do believe that. We have some really remarkable people here, whether they're formal or informal leaders. And I do think that a significant focus on integrity overshadows even curiosity and humility, because if you have integrity, it's easier to develop curiosity and humility. If you don't have integrity, the others don't matter to me. So, you know, when we talk about prepared, to me, one of the key things in preparing the next generation, and some of the big cracks I've seen socially across our country, across the world during the pandemic, is our extreme need to prepare people to understand, find, and support integrity.
These three things must be modeled. Again, you can't put a poster on the wall that says humility. A lot of people have these as values, core values, right? Integrity, respect, trust, you know. But they mean nothing on paper. The magic happens when you, as a board, model this behavior. And you're being hold each other accountable for these three traits. It's the only way it's going to happen. So if you're honest with yourself, you may have gaps in some of these traits that you can help each other out with. There's a saying that culture will eat strategy for lunch. Our firm likes to say, but modeling inclusive behavior will reshape culture. So, the strategy that Westerville City Schools must have is to model inclusive behavior. All day, every day, 24/7, never taking a day off. We pledged allegiance to the flag. I've been working with clients and I've developed a pledge of inclusiveness that they have devoted to pledge every time they step into their course of employment. If we pledged to inclusiveness just like we pledge to the flag every morning in our classrooms, it will be front of mind. And I'd be glad to provide that pledge for you. Maybe you can think about applying it. But that's an example that it needs to be modeled. There needs to be intrinsic commitment to it to make it a reality. It just doesn't happen. This is a diagram that I like to use. Korn Ferry is a well-known diversity, equity, and inclusion firm, consulting firm. I'm a licensed, a certified trainer with Korn Ferry in inclusive leadership, actually. Productivity on one axis and time on the other. The diverse teams get out the box real slow when forming and storming. And the homogeneous team gets out real fast out the box as they form and storm. Anybody know why that happens? You have any thoughts, Nicole?
Just getting to know each other.
Diverse teams are filling themselves out. Who's strong at what? Who knows how to do what? How do they think? Why do the homogeneous teams get out the box so quickly? They think alike. They graduate from the same school. They live in the same neighborhood. They belong to the same fraternity. Whatever, sorority. But look what happens after the diverse team forms and storms. They begin to norm at a much higher level of productivity. Look at that gap in productivity. The homogeneous team actually levels off and slopes down slightly as they norm and perform. If you always do what you've always done, you always be what you've always been. Your question, Westerville City Schools want the level of productivity of diverse teams or homogeneous teams? What's the constant with both diverse teams and homogeneous teams? They're well managed by inclusive leaders, and so there are limits when you have homogeneous, same, groupthink, because they only know what they know. Maybe they have biases. Maybe they don't want to change. But they're forced to change when they're in diverse groups. Somebody put it to me this way. If you're headed to a meeting and you know diverse people are going to be there, you're likely to prepare much more because you don't know what to anticipate. So you want to be the sharpest knife in the drawer. So that better preparation leads to better ideas being discussed and better solutions being made in that meeting because you prepared yourself, because it's not going to be the same old thing discussed and the same old outcomes. You're not going to be able to finish each other's sentences, right? Inclusive leadership does not occur automatically. That's that modeling, intentional modeling. It also is bolstered by one's exposure to diverse people. Well, you've got that in your demographic breakdown of Westerville City Schools, right? That challenge their preconceived notions and force them to overcome unconscious biases. And I submit to you that that's what's happening here. That's why they're performing better, because they're forced to they sit in their discomfort, as the other diagram showed us. And they become more adept at dealing with diverse groups, leveraging those diverse ideas and thoughts. Everyone possesses such notions of biases to some degree. Like I said, everybody has bias. Inclusive leaders are able to better identify and thus manage their unconscious and implicit bias before they impact their decisions as leaders. So the challenge is to be the reason someone feels welcomed, seen, heard, valued, loved, and supported. Some people get squirmy when we use the word love. Don't you know that some of these kids don't have love in their home? So it may be that teacher, that staff member, that janitor, that bus driver that gives them the first hint of love and affection that they don't even get at home. so you can lead from where you are. In fact, sometimes you have to lead from where you are because these characteristics are needed. Continuum of inclusive leadership. Everybody wants to grow. To grow, you have to differentiate. Say you want to create you get approved the levy to build another school, a high school, right? So that's differentiating. You're replicating your high school in a bigger and different environment. But there's a different side of town than you have schools in before. You're in uncharted territory. So to differentiate, you need to innovate to figure out how we're going to do the same thing in this strange new area. To innovate, you need diversity. To activate the diversity, you need inclusion, because diversity by itself is just representation. Inclusion is where the business case happens. And to manage all this, you need what? Somebody read that as loud as you can. A little louder.
Inclusive leadership.
There you go. I just want you to look at the percentages here for the business case for inclusive leadership. And I'm going to ask you a trick question. 81% more performance and productivity. 84% increased motivation. 86% increased innovation and creativity. 79%, a low 79%, of improved collaboration, and 81% greater engagement and loyalty. Westerville City Schools doesn't want that, does it? No, you don't want that here. This is a 2014 study, so I'm assuming that those statistics have grown. McKinsey & Company has a branch here. They're a well-known think tank in diversity and inclusion. But this is 2018. Creating an effective inclusion and diversity strategy is no small effort, and it requires strong, sustained, and inclusive leadership. There's that inclusive leadership that is the catalyst to all of this success that you as districts want. All of these high statistics that I'm sure you want here in Westerville City Schools. Can somebody read that?
Build a team so strong, no one can point out the lead.
What does that mean to you? Which one of those three traits, humility, curiosity, integrity, does that speak to?
Yeah, I think it would speak to all of them in many different ways.
It's a little different from my way or the highway. If you don't like it, get out, because I'm doing it my way.
A lot of this makes me think about there's a difference between a manager and a leader. And a manager can be a really good leader, but not always.
I have a whole session on the difference between manager and leaders. Managers do things better. Leaders do better things.
So I take that in another direction. I don't dispute that, but I also see it differently in that we sometimes focus on a concentrated thought of leadership. We say a leader. Across this organization, people may fall into leadership roles at any time, at any moment, oftentimes driven by their passion and what that means for them. And so it's not about the leader, it's about how much leadership you can create within the organization around the things you're trying to accomplish, and recognizes when you need to be a leader and when you need to be a follower. And we all have to have those roles. So the more leadership as an organizational component across the system, the stronger we'll be. And that speaks to the diversity and humility, allowing for that to happen, not just allowing for it, creating it, building it, and desiring that as a state for the system is really what you want to be. We are too large to focus on a singular leader or 2 or 5 or 6 leaders. And today, we had 15,000 kids show up and 2,000 employees. If you don't think someone stood in a leadership role somewhere out there today we didn't see, you're fooling yourself. And they may have done something more impactful for a child today than what I did. So we have to move away from this concentrated sense that someone is this or someone is that and look at it as saying, it can happen. It can happen from students. I watched it in a classroom today. I watched it in a 4th grade classroom at Hawthorne Art class today as students led the class, led each other, and collaborated in a fashion that just made my day.
And
So
the children shall lead us.
it was a powerful day. Powerful. It was a powerful 40 minutes with kids.
You know, what this phrase points out is what you just said, John. Modeling is the way to make sure you can't produce leaders, you have to inspire leaders. So if you model, and if they know that that's the way things happen here in Westerville City Schools, they're going to either get on board or maybe, just maybe, find a different place to work. And so this gets to modeling. Build a team so strong, no one can point out the leader because you're modeling what is expected, and it convicts everybody. Everybody catches it, and it's highly contagious, right? Vaughn, did you have anything? Okay. So we're going to spend the last 10 minutes or so on these last couple of slides. And this is going to be a dialogue. But these are types of inclusive leadership styles. A growth leader. Can somebody read the red font there?
Sees and understands how to reach, design for, and serve traditionally underrepresented employees, customers, and clients.
An innovation leader. Somebody read that.
Views problems as challenges to be overcome and is open to diverse points of view.
Somebody read change leader.
Can master the ability to inspire and motivate people in a dynamic environment with unprecedented diverse teams.
Dynamic environment. That's that changing thing that you're trying to prepare for all the time. You're striving to prepare yourself the best you can. And the diverse teams is those diverse demographic numbers we talked about. Somebody read global leader.
Requires global perspectives, cultural agility, self-awareness, openness, and flexibility.
Altruistic leader.
Is humble and knows how to identify the needs, strengths, and weaknesses of their team in order to relate to them appropriately based on their different and unique personal characteristics.
Now I want Tracy, Jennifer, Christy, and John to group up and talk about which one of these, pick one of these leadership styles that you think most represents your style. Just pick one that most represents your leadership style. Nancy, Vaughn, and Nicole, you do the same thing. We'll do that for a few minutes, and then one of you pick a spokesperson to report out. Ready? So, before you report out, raise your hand if you're a growth leader. Growth leaders, raise your hand. Okay, no growth leaders? Okay. Innovation leaders, raise your hand.
We decided that's you, John. We dealt with us.
No
We went on.
innovation leaders. Okay. Change leaders, raise your hand. You got Tracy? Okay. And Nicole? Okay, half a hand up. A global leader, raise your hand. Got one? One global, okay. Altruistic leader, raise your hand. Okay, okay. All right, first, before you report out, remember this thing? Every one of you should have raised your hand for a global leader. Right? So who's going to report out for this group? What was your discussion?
Well, I think our discussion was really like
Oh, use your mic, please.
I'm sorry. My apologies. I'm normally very loud and people tell me to be quiet, so it's kind of interesting. But so I think some of the discussion was like we could see ourselves in various leadership roles depending on the day, depending on the circumstance, depending on who's in the room, where to fall back or to step forward. So it really does depend. It's not a static thing.
Now, lawyers are supposed to have the it depends answer, Nancy and Kirsty. That's all right, but yeah, that's a great... Any other person from the group want to comment? No? What about this group?
Well, we decided it's all a Venn diagram. And we, as that group decided as well, it depends. And strong leaders, good leaders often have the ability to move within the types of leadership styles that are necessary given the needs of the people they're with. So it was interesting. I think we all approached it from how do the people we work with see us? What evidence do we have of how they've seen us?
That is great, Nancy. It's not what kind of leader you think you are. It's what do the kids think, John? What do they think your leadership style is? And is it really one that really connects with them, inspires them, motivates them, encourages them? It was a trick question. It was unfair to make you pick one because you were both right that the agile, flexible, capable leader must have every one of these 5 inclusive leadership traits in their tool belt to address any situation that might come up from time to time, from day to day, that might be totally different. And you might have to pull out that global leader tool. You might have to pull out the innovation leader tool, the change leader. It depends on the need. That's equity. Remember, we said everybody doesn't start at the same place, so we can't give them the same thing. They might need any one of these types of leadership traits at any time, to be able to have their needs met to gain the opportunity that they deserve. You all passed that test. You are great students. These are 5 action steps. This is a 5-step action plan for inclusive leadership. Openness and awareness. Effective advocacy for diversity. Trusting and open teams. Diversity and greater adaptability. Driving results. Now, I want you just to take a minute and circle one of these leadership traits, these action steps that you feel you need the most development in. If we were going to have a professional development course for the board members, you individually, which one of these 5 traits would you need the most professional development in? Being more open and aware related to diversity, being an effective advocacy for diversity, being able to develop trusting and open teams, diversity and greater adaptability, or driving results with diverse teams. Circle one that you think you're less proficient in and need the most development in. Individually, yes. It starts with you. This one I really do want you to circle just one. Let me know when you've circled it, and I'm going to give you a challenge. You circled it? Okay. Everybody choose one? All right, the challenge is to pick a fellow board member or close associate, work colleague, that can be your buddy, to help you develop in that area of weakness that you have. Board member to board member, sit down with each other and figure out how you can be more open and aware. Personal leadership traits such as self-awareness, emotional intelligence, self-control, motivation, empathy, humility, other traits of emotional intelligence. It may be driving results. Get that buddy to help challenge you and motivate you to be an inclusive leader that promotes greater diversity and inclusion because it sparks innovation and leads to advances in product development, service delivery, problem solving, better outcome and results. Trusting open teams. Get a buddy to challenge you. Again, I told somebody before the workshop, the magic happens after the workshop, not during this 2 hours that we spent. That's where the commitment takes place. That's where the learning happens. That's where you apply these theories and concepts to your actual work environment. Trusting in open teams. As organizations hire more diverse talent, the increased diversity can result in discord, even disruption. Remember that diverse teams and homogeneous teams, they were disruptive, trying to figure out who had strengths and weaknesses. But once they got going, the solution is not to ignore differences and search for similarities, but instead to seek to learn about and champion differences that may initially cause conflict. Remember that becoming anti-racist diagram, sitting in your discomfort. That's what that means. Getting more comfortable with it, more proficient in it. Remember, the goal to diversity and inclusion is to get better, not to get perfect. Never-ending battle for truth, justice, and the American way. So I'm going to challenge you, and I'm going to put you on the honor system on that. The proof will be in the pudding, right? I'm going to close with this slide. Psychological safety, which is a really important thing that's sparked and catalyzed by inclusive leaders. The value of diverse differences among teams cannot be explored by inclusive leaders unless a trusting and open environment has been established. Trusting and open teams was one of those 5 action steps, right? This is also called establishing psychological safety. So psychological safety exists when employees, students, whatever, staff aren't afraid to be themselves, take risks, share ideas, make mistakes. We've talked about that. Raise problems. ask questions, and God forbid, disagree with John. Or Tracy, the chair of the board. President. Is it president? Okay. Let me tell you a little story. And many of you may remember this from last time. I don't know if I did this last time or not. 1986, Space Shuttle Challenger soars into the atmosphere. And a minute and a half, 2 minutes into the launch, it completely disintegrates. All 7 astronauts, rocket scientists, mothers, fathers, uncles, wives, husbands, go up in smoke. Trillions of dollars of technology all destroyed. Maybe the cure to Alzheimer's, cancer, who knows? An engineer that worked on the combustion engine team named Rob Ebling knew that those seals on those combustion engines would not hold through atmospheric extremes of cold, heat, pressure, because there was a defect. He didn't feel psychologically safe to raise that problem. He didn't want to take the risk because he was a staff engineer on the combustion engine team. Who was he? In fact, President Ronald Reagan on the very next day was going to announce the space shuttle launch in his State of the Union address. Actually, it was the same day. He was going to announce it that night. So how dare Rob Ebling bring this up and cancel the launch? This is an example of the extreme cost of psychological danger within NASA, for example. 7 lives, trillions of dollars of technology, all kinds of scientific breakthroughs. So I'll ask you this as we close. Is there psychological safety at Westerville City Schools? Are you as board members not afraid to be yourself, your unique self? Take risks, share ideas, make mistakes, raise problems, ask questions, and even disagree. You don't have to answer that question because you know it in the heart of the hearts. But psychological safety is the beginning to all the stuff that we've been talking about. And with that, my presentation is over. Do you have any questions, comments, or closing thoughts?
I just want to thank you tonight for facilitating this for us. It was very helpful and beneficial. So thank you. Anybody else want to say anything?
Psychological safety is key to it all. And it is something that I wrestle with in my head all the time as we look at all aspects of diversity and the ability to talk to each other and the ability to help our kids grow to be adults who know how to talk to each other. The psychological safety piece, I think, in some ways is one of the hardest things for many people to develop, help others develop. And as we go forward with our work around all components of diversity, and as we learn better to celebrate all of us, identifying barriers to psychological safety in whatever it may be that we are doing will be pivotal. So I thank you very much. I think it was really important the way you ended with that. Bring it up earlier would not have worked. Bring it at the end just
encapsulates all that you talked about. I really appreciate this evening, and maybe we ought to work together across the district on psychological safety mechanisms, if you will, and understandings.
Thank you, Nancy, and thank you all board members and John for having me here to support you. You know, psychological safety is culture. And so think about one word that comes to your mind to describe the organizational culture at Westerville City Schools. And you'll know in your heart of hearts whether psychological safety exists based on that one-word description of what you see the culture of this organization being. All right, well, thank you very much, and I look forward to working with you again.
6.1, the board will meet in a regular session on Monday, February 28th, 2022 at 6:30 p.m. here at the Early Learning Center. And with that, may I have a... Oh, should say 6 o'clock. Good catch. At 6 p.m.
I know, that's what I was thinking. Shush. Be quiet, Dawn. Be quiet.
7.1, may I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Mrs. Meyer,
Yes.
Mr. Bell,
Yes.
Dr. Icebreaker,
Yes.
Mrs. Altman,
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson.
Yes. And we're adjourned.